So what's up with this? What are we doing?
Okay, we're doing an interview. It's called Open Source, is a series. And the idea is to talk to people like you who've been around the block
A few times.
and have been doing this yoga stuff for 6,000 years. And just really to talk to you about the history of your practice and how it's evolved over the years. Your
Sure.
home, I mean, my primary focus, I'm obsessed with home practice.
Mm-hmm.
I think, um, especially
That's what
in,
it's really about.
yeah. And especially in my generation of yogis, we're so spoiled because we grew up with yoga studios on every corner. And so
Yeah.
it's possible to practice for years and never have really gone inside into a space of silence and cultivated a home practice.
It's not only your generation. I mean, this is, I don't know, are you recording this? Or by the way,
I'm recording, yeah.
okay, it's fine. And is it video?
It's video. We can see you.
It's okay. When you called, I said, oh, wait a second, is this a live video? And
It's not live, no. But I
as much
do.
as I can at my ancient age. Anyway, so, this is just an aside, then we can start. But, about Yoga Alliance. When Yoga
Mm-hmm.
Alliance began, I was in the dialogue that was the pre-Yoga Alliance, the first Yoga Alliance dialogue, which was in San Francisco at one of these Yoga Journal conferences years and years and years ago. And as it evolved, Yoga Alliance, before it was Yoga Alliance, and then it became Yoga Alliance, some of the people that were in charge of it had been students of mine on and off. And I had a long sort of dialogue. I don't want to say debate exactly with them because they're measuring hours, training hours. And I tried to talk to them about the difference between being trained in a group with 50 people and having a one-on-one private session. And I had been trained in India with most of my hours of training were one-on-one private sessions. And it's a very different thing than being trained in a group. But the Yoga Alliance didn't understand that. I'm talking about people in my generation even who were involved with Yoga Alliance. They just never had experienced private lessons.
Yeah.
So they didn't understand what it was. And what we were taught is that private lessons is how you initiate people into personal. You call it home practice. I call it personal practice. And that was what we were trained. Our goal is as teachers, which is to make people independent of us and train them how to go deeper in their own personal practice.
So let's start there. Talk to me a little bit about how you met your teacher. I assume you're talking about Desikachar.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So when did you meet him? When did you first see him? How did you feel?
Should I tell you this?
Tell me the story.
Context. So I went to college in the early 70s, 1970s, and I went to a university called Colgate, Colgate University, and I ended up in the religious studies department. I was interested since even long before college in world religions, and I wouldn't have said world religions back then, but just the inner, what's going on? Why are we here? That's been my interest since I was a kid. So there was a phys ed requirement, and so I took the first semester. I took a class on Hinduism, and in the phys ed requirement, I took this karate class. I had been a gymnast in high school, so I knew I wasn't into competitive sports, team sports rather, but gymnastics. So I took this course in Hinduism, and I encountered Patanjali, and I was like, "Whoa, what's this?" I loved that, but I wasn't appreciative of the karate class. I didn't like that. So the next semester, and it's kind of an interesting reversal because the next semester I took the academic class on Buddhism,
Mm-hmm.
and I took the yoga class that was being offered at the university. So this yoga class was being taught by a woman named Mary Louise Skelton, whose husband was an ethnomusicologist and took study groups, music students, to India to study Carnatic music. And she had gone in the late 60s with her husband. They lived there on and off for over 15 years, back and forth to India. And she met Krishnamacharya. And she met Krishnamacharya because the American consulate general, a guy named Albert Franklin, who was the consulate general in Madras, was a student of Krishnamacharya. And at some, event at the consulate, she met him, and she had arthritis, and so Franklin told Skelton about Krishnamacharya. Anyway, she became a student of Krishnamacharya. So this woman was, her husband was an ethnomusicologist, so she became a student of Krishnamacharya. So when she came back to Colgate, they would only let her teach it in the phys ed department, but she taught this class in yoga. And so I took that class, and it was just an immediate connection between me and her and the yoga. And 6 months later, I was in India. So they were, I know, it's like I was 19 years old. So, what the heck? And my parents I was a good student, I was a good kid, and they didn't create any obstacles. And they were bringing a group of music students to Madras, but I arranged coursework, or they helped me arrange coursework at Madras University. And there I was studying Shaivite Siddhanta, which is a South Indian form of Shaivite Tantric teachings. Mm-hmm. But the guy that was teaching it was an extraordinary guy. He was a practitioner and a well-known and respected mystic and a great academic. So there I met Krishnamacharya and then his son Desikachar, and was studying this sort of science of yoga, but with the kind of orientation towards the teachings of yoga, not just the practice. And Desikachar, who was this mystic Shaivite. So I was really getting, a deep connection to the spiritual tradition of India, a tantric mystical path, and sort of the yoga science that Krishnamacharya and his son Desikachar were teaching. And so in the beginning, we went through some asana, but I had been a gymnast, so that came quickly. Mm-hmm. I was there for 6 months and was with the study group, and I had classes like 2 or 3 days a week with Desikachar, and then I was taking a bus from where we were staying out to Madras University and having a private tutorial with Desikachar. So we were studying. I mean, this is probably TMI for
no. This is.
But we were studying bridal mysticism.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very thick poetry where God is the bridegroom and the soul is the bride, and the progression of the soul to God is like the procession of the symbolism is of a bride going to her wedding. Mm-hmm. So it was very thick, but he was a practitioner mystic, so it wasn't just like this weird academic thing. It was really about personal growth and transformation. So I was getting it from both ends, academically, and then the practice of yoga. And so when I came back, this was in 1974. I was there for 6 months. So when I came back, I just graduated college and then went right back to India for 2 years. I didn't see Desikachar again. He passed. He died. But I saw, I came into Krishnamacharya's house and saw Desikachar became my main teacher. I had interaction with Krishnamacharya, but he just would stop and tell me things, and personal things. But most of my coursework was with Desikachar, and it was all privates. Later, we did some group classes. Like, group classes were not for asana practice or pranayama practice. They were just for textual study. Okay. So studying some Upanishads and some Yoga Sutra classes. We did Yoga Sutras privately and some Upanishadic teachings privately, but group classes as well for chanting and learning text. So I remember you asked me like the progression of it. So I was a gymnast and I was a kid. I mean, a big kid, 19. And then I came back after I graduated, and so I graduated in 76. So I was young. I was like a year ahead. So I graduated in 21 from Colgate, and I went back to India. So I consider myself, a young man. And so we did, and I had also moved to Maui right in the interim. My parents moved to Maui after I graduated. Mm-hmm. So I had encountered the Ashtanga yoga people. So you know who I'm talking about. And David Williams, who was really the first, not actually the first, the second, but he was the first main Ashtanga teacher in the United States. And he was living on Maui, so we became friends. And so I wanted to see, when I got back to India, well, what's this Pattabhi Jois and this Ashtanga series? So they taught me that. They said, yeah, this was what Krishnamacharya developed. I don't want to get into the politics. There's some different information that came out of Madras than now Chennai than what came out of the Americans who said what Pattabhi Jois said. So let's leave that. Yeah. Who knows what happened? But what we were taught is that, and I saw a book called Yoga Makaranda where Krishnamacharya organized postures in the sequence that you see in Ashtanga for training young Brahmin boys originally. and then he had some Western students that his Krishnamacharya did, like Indra Devi, and then Mary Lou Skelton, who was my first teacher. But he was already, even then, adapting that sequence for adults. It was different than what Ashtanga teaches. So I went out there to see that. So they taught me asana. In my mid-20s, they started teaching me pranayama. Really, the first lessons were by hearting, as the Indian English, chanting Patanjali's Yoga Sutras.
Mm-hmm.
So he would chant and I would repeat until I memorized it. And then slowly we would go through sutra by sutra, word for word, the meaning. But I was at the same time studying asana and pranayama. And as I got, so there was a period of, I went back and lived there from 76 to 78. And in that time, they started teaching me things that are related to what we now call yoga therapy. They call it yoga chikitsa. Because Krishnamacharya's lineage was about the breadth of yoga, including the inner practices and a form of, let's say, Vaishnav tantric practices, which I'll explain a little later. But although I was being initiated in that, I didn't really understand what that was in my early 20s, but I started learning the therapy. And so I came back to Maui and started my first business in the mid-70s. I opened Maui Yoga Therapy, which was called, and I was just doing one-on-one patient care. I had students who were refugees from hula dancing, and because the original style for training hula was almost like a martial form, and so middle-aged American housewives who wanted to come learn hula ended up hip and knee problems, and refugees literally from the Ashtanga community who had rotator cuff issues or disc problems. So I started doing a lot of one-on-one structural yoga therapy for people with those kinds of problems. And as I continued to work, people started coming to me. They were having sleeplessness or pain management or fatigue or digestive distress or menstrual issues. So I went back and lived another period of time in India. I've lived probably about 4 years there altogether and went deeper into the study of yoga therapy. But as I got into it, we started looking at the mind and the role. I mean, I've been studying Patanjali consistently every time I went back, and the role of the mind, emotions, and stories that we tell ourselves, and our dysfunctional behavior in our conditions, because a lot of these conditions people suffer from are also lifestyle related. So we started studying. He started teaching me more deeply meditation, and the use of mantra. And inner practices, and then it evolved into what the teaching evolved into what I now understand as is a form of Tantric Yoga, which integrates mantra with movement, with breath, with visualization, with ritual activities that we call nyasa, gestures, with sankalpa, setting intention. And so really I was trained in the lineage of Krishnamacharya's lineage of Tantric Yoga. So yoga therapy and Tantric Yoga.
So you're living in Krishnamacharya's house on your first trip when you're 19.
We rented a house. This was with a bunch of students. So we rented a house, and it was, I think there was about 10 of us. A lot of them stayed in the hotel, but about 10 of us were, the rebellious ones. Anyway, we rented a house and lived together. They were mostly dance and music students.
And so when you're studying with Krishnamacharya and Desikachar in those early months, and then on the next trip.
Well, let me just interrupt. Just to be clear, my one-on-one sessions were with Desikachar, but I had conversations and contact with Krishnamacharya. So I would depending upon the different times I lived there, but usually I would ride a bike to their house.
And so that's my question. So was it kind of structured? Now we're learning, now we're teaching, now we're not? Or was it just being in their presence was receiving the transmission?
No, there was, of course there's some transmission being in their presence, but especially with Krishnamacharya. But with Desikachar, I actually had, hour-and-a-half classes, several days a week. And sometimes I would see him not in the beginning, not at 19, but later I would see him in the morning, and then I would go have lunch, and then I would come back in the afternoon.
Wow.
So when he was working privately, he would just have a few people that he would see. So sometimes he would see, it depends what mood he was in, to be honest, and who we're talking about. Like some people he would only see once a week, I mean, Europeans would come all the way to India, and they would be very frustrated because they would want more time. Me, he would see every day, sometimes twice a day, but then sometimes if he was mad or something, who knows what, I don't know, then I wouldn't get to see him for 2 days. But I lived there for many years, so I had a lot of one-on-one private time. And usually I would just ride a bike to his house and go up the stairs and wait. And sometimes Krishnamacharya would be sitting there. So I remember in the beginning I was afraid to go up the stairs. I was afraid of Krishnamacharya, I can remember. But then I slowly got able to, go sit with him, and he would look and he would say some things, and I remember things he said, and then I would go have my session with Desikachar, and then I would go home and have lunch, or.
And how old was Desikachar at this point?
So I think he was about 18 years older than me. So when I was 20, that means he was 38, and then I studied with him until 2000. So, and 2000 is 15 years ago. So, and I just turned 60, so 45. So I studied with him into my late 40s. I think I saw him after that, into my late 40s. And so if I'm late 40s, then he's, is in somewhere in his 60s, older than I am now. And I studied with him into his late 60s or mid 60s, I guess.
So, and now, you're a teacher. Okay, so studying one-to-one, one-on-one is incredibly powerful. I know that from studying with my mom. But it's also, as a teacher, you can only see a few people if that's the way you're going to teach. And teaching a class, you can touch a lot more people. So for you as a teacher, how do you weigh, in the remaining years you have to teach on this planet, how do you weigh the effectiveness on one-on-one versus the power of teaching a big group?
Beautiful. Well, let me share with you a little bit about the evolution of my teaching. The
Please.
first almost decade of my teaching, maybe not quite 10 years, it was just one-on-one. And it was Maui yoga therapy, so my self-concept was it's almost like patient care. Some students people came to me for different reasons, but the ones that ended up practicing the most were the ones who were in pain, from some kind of pain, whether physical pain or they weren't sleeping well, or they were having an emotional problem. And so we did that. And then the other group was people that were really like me as a kid. I didn't come to yoga from pain, just passion to know the truth and understand. So I had students like that as well. And my wife, or now my ex-wife, more than 10 years my ex-wife, but so she said, you should start teaching groups. So I did. And so I started teaching small groups. I had in fact, some of my California students who used to fly out to study with me used to call my studio the Maui yoga closet, because we could put 8 people comfortably.
Yeah.
But after that, we have had classes. I did have classes as big as 12 or 15 people, but it was like using a lot of adaptation because there wasn't really room. But then Desikachar told me in the late 1970s, he had me teaching in India, because a lot of Europeans would come. And so he had me teaching there. And he said, you should start training teachers. So I started training teachers. I don't think I actually agreed to do it until 1981. I came back. I went to graduate school. I was studying Sanskrit at University of California, Santa Barbara. Had an amazing professor there also. But he said, Desikachar said I should start training teachers. So I started training teachers in 81 or 82. And then in 85, he said I should start training therapists. And I got invited to go to Zinal. Do you know about Zinal?
No.
There's a guy named, who's gone now. He was just a little bit younger than Krishnamacharya. His name was Gerard Blitz.
Okay.
And him and his father started the Club Med.
Okay.
And he was a Belgian Olympic swimmer.
Okay.
Blitz was. But when I met him, he was Krishnamacharya's age, so the Club Med's pretty old, because it was his father, I think, that started it. He started, and he was a student of Krishnamacharya, and he started the European Union of Nationally Federated Yoga Teachers.
Okay.
So that means it's a collective of national federations, so the French Federation, like that. And he's had these meetings once a year in Zinal, Switzerland. So I was invited to go by Desikachar, and one year I went there and I met Rama Vernon, and she had started Unity in Yoga. So they invited me to I was living on Maui, but they started inviting me to national conferences. So I was training teachers, then flying to the mainland, as we called it then, to attend national conferences. And then people would meet me, so some people would fly to Maui. And then the Unity and Yoga got transferred to Yoga Journal. So I was at, that's when I met your mom. And actually, she was at Unity and Yoga too. I met her way back then, but like in the early 1980s.
Okay.
And so I started doing national conferences and continuing to train teachers. I had small group classes. Then I started teaching at Maui Community College. And I called that class Yoga as Movement Therapy. Mm-hmm. And that was all like local people, Japanese and Filipinos and Hawaiians. It was very interesting. So, I mean, for years I taught group classes. But in the beginning of my group class teaching, I never did drop-in classes. The only people who I invited to my classes were people that had done a minimum of like 5 or 6 privates with me, because they understood how to feel the postures, activate them in their own bodies. Right. So my first group classes were only for people who had done privates with me. And over the years, my life was on Maui and traveling to the mainland. So I just stopped doing, I really only for a very short period of time in my teaching did drop-in group classes. And now what I do, because now we're talking, 40 years later, what I do is train teachers, train therapists, and also train trainers. Mm-hmm. I mentor people that are training teachers and training therapists now in how to do that. And then I do conferences and workshops around the country. And then the way I do my private work, in the old days when I was doing privates, I'd fly to the mainland, teach a workshop, and then after the workshop, see 2 people privately. And I would be on the mainland working for 10 days, and I'd see 3 or 4 privates a day in addition to classes when I was younger and I had the energy. And it was crazy. It's ridiculous. Because on Maui, when I was doing patient care, I could see 3 or 4 people a day, 5 days a week, private, But now, if I have a few weeks a year that I open up, and I only see 1 person a week.
Wow.
Which is, when Desikachar was working with me, he would maybe see 2 people. So, but for me, I just see 1 person. So I work with them these are on inner practices usually. It includes Asana and Pranayama, but it's really about chanting and meditation. And it's really about them and them transforming at a deeper level. So people come out and book like a private retreat. They'll fly, as an example, they'll fly out on a Sunday, and then I'll work with them Monday to Friday, and they'll leave on Saturday. Mm-hmm. And I'll see nobody but them. And there's time that I'm with them, but then I also spend time away when they're not there, just sort of working on them and their practice. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm doing now. That's the evolution of it.
I like that combination. So can you tell us what does your personal practice look like? Like today, or today's a Wednesday, so a normal weekday. Is it different on the weekends? What is your practice like?
No, the evolution of my practice is, from a gymnast, and then like going through all the asana and stuff. I sort of shifted over decades away from trying to do a lot of asana to understanding what were the core asanas that kept my body stable and strong, and that helped me cultivate a relationship with, I'm going to use an image that we use in the tradition. It may sound a little strange, the central channel. So it's called Sushumna. It's like the spine, but really in the subtle body. So it's not actually the spine. Because what I was taught is, the tradition of asana, the old tradition of asana, is really about the central channel. It's about cultivating a relationship with your spine, and it's about as a doorway into this, and it's really not about sort of mastering the body as much as preparing the breath and the body for seated meditation. So I do the kinds of asana that I need because of my unique body, like the situation of my hips or my low back, or I had brain surgery. I don't know if you even know about that. If you want to read, there's an article that Yoga International published called Radical Healing, and it's about my work with people with life-threatening illness, but they also sort of talked about, I had 3 major brain surgeries because it was benign, fortunately, but it was in a very dangerous location, a tumor. Why did I say that? I forgot why I said that.
You're talking about your personal practice and Shishunya.
Yeah, So I had done all that asana stuff, and I started realizing like what's really important, and especially with the context of brain surgery. So I started. The evolution was from understanding my body in asana to cultivating a relationship with the central channel and preparing the breath. So for me, I use the asana now to take care of, oh, I know, I said the brain surgery. So like, for example, the things I have to take care of, they damaged a cranial nerve in my surgery. It's called the superior oblique. It's a pulley. And so if I don't know if you can see it in Skype, but I have a slight right head lean. And that's compensatory for my eyes because they damaged the fourth cranial nerve that controls that muscle. So as an example, like I do beyond the central channel, I use asana so that I don't have a stiff neck, so that my back is strong and stable. But then it's really to deepen my breathing for long-term sitting for pranayama. So I use the asana to prepare my breath for pranayama, and then the pranayama to prepare my mind for meditation, so my mind is still and focused. And then the nature of the practice that I do now is kind of central channel breathing with mantra in the, and meditation. So for me, the whole thinking about yoga it's never about the practices, it's always about the practitioner. Mm-hmm. So the asanas aren't about the asanas, they're helping me stabilize my body or doing something specific with my body. The pranayama is not about the breath techniques, it's really about creating sympathetic parasympathetic balance and then cultivating this inner connection to the central channel. And then the mantras in meditation are initially about helping me resolve emotional issues or stop telling stories to myself about myself.
Yeah, that's something I took a note about. I wanted to ask can you talk a little bit more about this mind emotion story connection?
Yeah, I mean the way that we in the language that I was trained in and trained therapists in, and I do a lot of the training of therapists, and a lot of the people that come through our training program are licensed Western healthcare practitioners, including a whole big number of psychologists and quite a growing number of psychiatrists, because they're fascinated with this. Yoga potentially is fundamentally about the mind. So yoga and yoga therapy are really fundamentally about the mind. So the language that I kind of use is that we have like a feeling nature, an emotional nature, mood, and we have a cognitive capacity that has to do with our ability to perceive and understand, but also we construct stories, we construct our identity as we're little children, we're just that little glowing being, and then we start having a personality that evolves, that is an influence, that's an interaction of our memory, our conditioning, our thoughts, the stories we've told ourselves about ourselves to justify our emotional responses, and then the stories we tell ourselves to explain, etc. And then all of that influences and pushes our action. So kind of simply put, the way we think about it, it's not linear, but our action comes from our thoughts, which comes from our emotions, which comes from our desires, which come from our deep patterns.
Right.
So the goal in yoga is kind of to surface the patterns and to empty ourselves of ourselves so that we can actualize who we truly are. Mm-hmm. And so the real inner yoga practices are about sorting through that and like what we would say, or when I say we, I mean the tradition I was trained in, is sort of surfacing and freeing ourselves from what's negative within us, and then negative characteristics, dysfunctional emotions, cognitive distortions, and addictive or dysfunctional behavioral patterns.
Yeah.
And then actualizing our highest potential as a human being, which has to do with clarity and compassion and strength and determination and commitment, etc.
So 2 questions. The first one, I guess, is easier. Is there some place we can read more about that written down? Is there a text you would point to?
Yeah, it's all the yoga is about that.
But I mean specifically about the stories and addictive habitual patterns. And then the second question, which maybe is the answer to the first question, where do you point to in the Yoga Sutra, or specifically kind of yama niyama? Can you point to a thread that's pointing at this topic?
Please forgive me for what I'm going to say, but the whole text is about that. I mean, it's not like it's in Sutra Chapter 2, Sutra 32 or whatever.
Yeah.
It's the whole context of the teaching, And not only yoga, so Patanjali is one text, but the whole thrust of, if you go back to Veda, the Vedic source.
Yeah. Which I have not read from A to Z.
Well, no, you can't. Forget it, And even if you did read it, you wouldn't understand it, and neither do I. So, I mean, but the idea is that the whole thrust of the Vedic teachings can be described as the quest for that vidya, V-I-D-Y-A, not avidya, but vidya, that knowledge which takes you beyond suffering. The whole tradition is about that. So these teachings are in the Upanishads, they're in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and Buddhism, which evolved out of, it's a religion that grew in the context of Vedic teachings, is a religion, or it's sort of a religion. It's a religion that's also about the same thing.
Right.
Surfacing the roots of suffering, understanding the roots of suffering, understanding, the causes of suffering, and beginning to work through them and actualizing your potential. So when you break it down, a human being is multidimensional, and therefore suffering is multidimensional.
Yeah.
We have back pain, that's a kind of suffering. You can have digestive distress or chronic headaches, that's a different kind of suffering. And you can have depression or anxiety, that's a different kind of suffering. And you can have a distorted view about yourself and the world you live in, and that's the stories I was talking about. And then you can have dysfunctional behavior, and you can have a weird personality. I mean, we all are weird, but you know what I mean? So, what I was taught from the beginning is that all of these practices are really about us, and sort of they're mirrors to help us understand and transform ourselves at different levels. Actually, like the way we understand the word yoga as link or join is cultivating a conscious relationship with our spine, through asana, with our breath, through pranayama, with our emotions and our thoughts through mantra chanting and meditation, and our action through sadhana and ritualized practices. That's what we call tantric ritual. And so what we're doing is using these tools to begin to refine ourselves at all these levels. I can't point to any one location because it's what the whole teaching is about. And I think the problem, of course, in the West is people haven't been initiated. And so they come at yoga from a very superficial perspective, and it's like now a sport and mastering your body, and that's cool, but that's really not, it's not, this body is impermanent, and it has a shelf life. It's like the letter, perishable item, open immediately.
Yeah.
This is a little strong statement, but what they told me, I was a religious studies student, so when I got there, it wasn't really when I was 19, it was when I came back after. They said the real purpose of yoga is preparation for the moment of death. So that's not what a 21-year-old really wants to hear. But that was the context in which I was taught. Yeah. So I came from that perspective, like, well, so what is it really about? And by the way, that brain surgery, that diagnosis really accelerated my understanding, because I had to sign the papers before I went into surgery that I may not wake up. Let's not go into that story. Not a nice one.
This is very similar to what Alan Finger told me in this same interview series. He told me when his father was dying, he told Alan, "Don't worry about my death. It's just Mahasamadhi. We've been trying to get these little sips of samadhi all along, and now I'm going into Mahasamadhi, so no problem."
Well, what they said, though, it's not that simple. I mean, but Manny Finger was a great practitioner.
Yeah.
But what they say is, and this is kind of the threat from the tradition, is that when you die, it's not over.
Yeah.
And where your consciousness is at the moment of death influences what happens to you. And that's why yoga is preparation for the moment of death. So you want to arrive in that place. You can't determine when that's going to be, but you can influence. And here's the next statement: the moment of death is uncertain.
Right.
It can happen at any moment. So die now almost is what they say. So you want to arrive at that place where you feel content or at peace or grateful, curious about what's next. You don't want to be resentful and with unfinished business and fearful and unactualized sort of desires. And so that's what the purpose of the practice is to become as present as possible with the reality of who we truly are, which is, they say Sat Chit Ananda, Atman, or Purusha. So that's the context in which I was, here's the funny thing is, so I'm this kid and I'm a gymnast. And I'm in India and there are all these Europeans, and they're doing yoga and music. And I'm like, so why are you doing that? Why are you doing? And I said to Desikachar, so, like I've done gymnastics. So I came here because I was studying Patanjali and religion. So what does downward dog have to do with Kaivalya? And the answer that I learned, they didn't give me a direct answer, but the answer that I began to understand through their teaching is that Asana and Pranayama are designed to build Prana Shakti, the energy you need to conquer your mind. So when I teach, I ask people this question: what's stronger, your habits or your intention? And the reality for most of us is that although we have good intention, it's our habits that trump. And why? Because our willpower is not strong enough.
Yeah.
We don't have enough energy. So what is Asana and Pranayama for? I mean, it's not to make the body immortal. There are those, legends in the, of Tantric masters and the Chinese immortals that maybe there are some individuals that reach a different level. I don't know the answer to that, although there seems to be evidence that it's true, but it's the rare being. But for the most part, they said that it's to build energy. Yeah. So you have discipline, determination, and willpower, so you can surface your patterns and conquer them and become free. So it wasn't about a sport. It was really just building energy so you can go deeper into meditation. And that itself was so that you can surface all the deeper layers of your unconscious patterns that came from past lives or whatever, however you want to think about the metaphysics of that, and become free.
See, I that's actually the perfect place to end. I think this insight you're talking about is why I wanted to do this interview series, having grown up watching someone get up, my mother, every morning and practice asana and do her sadhana. It's so interesting because my entire life, when people find out that my mom's a yoga teacher, I have received comments back, oh, she must be so fit or so healthy, or her body must be. And now I say, she's 67 years old. And I've watched her, especially in the last 15 years, go through health challenges, surgeries, age. And what's so beautiful to me is seeing her still get up and get on the mat. And in terms of the mat might be her meditation, or it's not a physical practice as much. And I wanted to kind of start to uncover that and talk about that with people who have experience, and also start to share that.
It's so beautiful. Thank you for doing it, really sincerely. Because I've been trying, and to be honest, when I first started, your mother and all those guys were sort of on the other side of the river from me, because they were studying with Mr. Iyengar, and at those days it was really an asana-centric practice and form-centric asana.
Yeah.
What I was taught with Krishnamacharya was not form-centric asana, not who cares about the form, but breath-centric asana is a very different thing than form-centric asana. The breathing, I always asked them back then, what's more important, your hamstrings or your liver? And I gave it, come on, give me a break, What's more important, your hamstrings? And nobody ever said hamstrings. And I want to honor your mother in a moment. So once I was giving a keynote at Yoga Journal, and I said, you Americans, many of you have reduced yoga to asana, and asana to hamstrings, and hamstrings to stretching.
Yeah.
So if you want to know the secret teachings of yoga, it's stretch your hamstrings. And this is at a keynote. And then the corollary to that was, if you really want to know what yoga is about, try improving your relationship with your mother. Now you're looking at what yoga is really about. So they hated me, of course. But years later, I heard your mother at a keynote say, what are they going to say about me when I die? Oh, Judith, she was so wonderful, her hamstrings were so loose. So I was so happy to hear her, her say that.
Yeah. Or I've heard her say, yoga's not about touching your toes, it's about what you learn on the way down.
Well, that's an interesting. Your mother has a lot of pithy,
yeah.
Wisdom that homespun kind of. That's beautiful. And for me, I was a religious studies student from, actually, it may sound strange, but from childhood. And at 19 years old, I was in Krishnamacharya's house, and I'd already been there, done that with gymnastics. So asana didn't, it was like, okay, cool, I've been there, done that. And of course, I didn't understand what it really was. And when they helped me understand, it's much more about the breath and then the subtle inner awareness and beginning to identify patterns of muscular contraction before they happen, and then tuning into sympathetic, parasympathetic regulation and using the breath. Most of pharmacology working for chronic disease are sympathetic, parasympathetic activators. Pranayama and breath-centric asana, it's a sympathetic, parasympathetic activator. So tuning into your ability to feel sympathetic, parasympathetic regulation, and then beginning to understand the movement of emotion, and then the movement of thought itself, and then that you're not your thoughts and you're not your story about yourself, and then beginning to tap into who you really are. That's what the teaching was that I received, and I'm so happy that people that practice for 20, 30 years, either they just become retired yoga jocks, or they start tapping into this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's great. It's really wonderful that you're. I don't know what the context of how you'll share this is, but I think it's really important. So you're like on our team.
Well, if you'll have me.
Oh God.
No, I think
really.
I do believe
this is your time now. So.
Yeah, I do believe I chose this lifetime in some way to be born with both my parents who are both seekers and teachers, and I think it is a kind of responsibility in the best sense of the word. I've been practicing since I was 18 years old, asana, and then moving towards meditation, and now at 32 I'm starting to teach publicly, because I started teaching when I was 22. I didn't have anything to say. I was just like,
I understand. Well, look, me. I was trained at 19 in India with Krishnamacharya. So what I was teaching then and what I'm teaching now, it's evolved a lot. And the more, what Desikachar used to say, every day, you can't give what you don't have.
Yeah.
So you receive this in, it's what the tradition says, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Although the word asana is there, it's not about asana. It's Shravana is you listen, Manana is you reflect on it, and then Nididhyasana, you put it into practice and feel the real transformation in your own lives. Then you can share from a deep place with your students.
Yeah.
So good luck as a teacher. Where do you live now?
Thank
you in LA?
No. I married an Austrian and I moved to Europe, and now we're in Munich. But
you're in Munich now? Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I'm teaching at Jivamukti here and starting to do workshops and conferences and growing.
Beautiful. Well, along the way, if you look at viniyoga.com and read a little bit about what we do, especially in yoga therapy, but also in the inner work.
Yeah.
And along the way, if there's anything I can share, it's an honor. I don't want this to go to your head, but the tradition says you're not born into a family of yoga practitioners. Unless you have past karma with yoga. So you have a great responsibility. Take it lightly, of course, but you're conscious of it. So you're a gift to, the only way this yoga tradition stays alive generationally is because of young people who get excited by it because of their teachers or whatever, and it gets passed on.
My mom said the first time she taught a yoga class, she suddenly felt nervous, and then she pictured her teacher and their teacher and all these teachers in the room with her, this image. And it's funny because that's what I feel sometimes. I sometimes see, we meditated the opening of class, and then I sometimes see, it's not really imagining, my mom and Mr. Iyengar are sitting there. Absolutely. And then I think, nothing can go wrong because...
Beautiful. And chanting can help you make that connection more deeply.
Yeah.
And that's the gift that I felt sad for a lot of the Iyengar people, because Krishnamacharya's teaching was all about that, and he never taught that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I love chanting, and it's great because I always say chanting sounds like my childhood, because my hippie parents, there was chanting everywhere, and so it's like...
So it's in you deeply.
It's soothing to me, this chanting. I've always loved it.
But it's also so I had to turn on Skype, and I had to put in a password. First I have to, the internet service provider, and then your password. That's like your mantra. So also this chanting isn't just about soothing your nervous system, although it does that. And it also can energize you, by the way. But it's tapping into the knowledge that's transmitted through the lineage. You can cultivate so what the yogis call it is the vidya. You can cultivate a living relationship to the Vidya through chanting, so that it's no longer coming kind of from your teacher to your mind. It's coming through the lineage.
Like
So
Wi-Fi, like wireless.
Exactly. That's what initiation is. I mean, using our modern computer imagery. So
Yeah.
let me tell you one other thing about your father. So I've said this in public, about your father, Yoga Journal publics, that, the legend of Patanjali, and I know you've done that chant, Yogena Chittasya, that chant. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So the legend is that he brought three great bodies of teaching for the purification of suffering. One for the purification of the body, and they attribute the Charka Samhita, which is the source text of Ayurveda, to Patanjali. They say Charka and Patanjali are the same being, and that's like the Yoga Sutras of Ayurveda is the Charka Samhita.
Right.
The second is for the purification of mind, and that's Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And then the third is for the purification of speech. And Patanjali, his name is attributed to this great text called the Mahabhashya. So I said that Marshall Rosenberg and Ike Lasater are the sort of Patanjali form for the purification of speech. So I mean, it's interesting that, what he's doing, I always honored what he was doing and consider that part of the yoga lineage. People don't know that, but many people don't know that. But speech and communication is one of the things that Patanjali was recognized as one of the great masters of. So
yeah, that's beautiful.
You got it from both sides of your family. So
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gary. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you.
You too, Lizzie. Good luck with everything, and thanks for what you're doing. By the way, is this going to be like available to see, or
it'll be
your composite work?
Yes, on my YouTube channel. I'll send you a link when this goes live.
Beautiful.
Bye. Namaste.
Bye.